history, episode 121. He's back.
I'm honored to be on your show, Charlie.
How's it going? What's going on?
I I've been pining to get back in the saddle here, and
Been
not to
waiting.
say it, you're when I was out and you had those solo episodes, well, one with Alex as a guest, just phenomenal work. I really enjoyed the episodes, and the feedback from listeners was altogether positive. So, bully for you, Charlie Westerman.
Awesome. Students becoming the master, you could say.
Yes, Miyagi do. Uh, the what was great to I really enjoyed the explanation you gave about the um chemtrails and all the different supposed conspiracies and conspiracy theories that we're not supposed to touch. You went boldly into that good night and then really uh did so without much hesitancy. I really appreciated your analysis and take on that. So I'm uh I'm glad that it is rewarding to see when you go out and do your own thing and you take it in ways that I wouldn't go in, but it's very not just creative and entertaining, but illuminating and dispels a lot of the clouds that, when we wrote the book, I think one of our main objectives that we shared with one another was to distill the clouds, the mental clouds, and the kind of plaque buildup that has accumulated in the minds of not just Americans, but anyone interested in history or the subject matters that we tackle in A Twisted History of the United States. And then subsequently, what we've done to tackle and address the subjects of import as we do so in this podcast. And as I think you even alluded to in one of the shows, you just said that this podcast has allowed me a vehicle to be able to express not just what's on your mind, but what is of great significance and ought to be of great significance to people at present and going forward. So it's a it's a point for mirth for me to see you do all that.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really happy with how the Alex episode turned out. I thought he was awesome.
It
And
was great, you know.
right.
And if
Yeah.
you haven't heard, I'm just picking at Charlie because he had spoken of how disappointed he was during the Alex episode about how many fillers of had.
It was pretty bad. It was pretty
I
bad.
If it makes you feel better, I didn't notice it. So, and I was listening to James Delingpole just today. He had a fascinating guest on, and she was, they were both saying how when they go on podcasts, immediately afterward, they don't remember anything of what they had said. So they have to go back and listen in order to even form a title or hit the high points and write a summary.
Have you heard the Andrew Tate rant on why he's a good speaker?
Oh, why is that? Because he is able to shift into five different accents like Christian Bale in one sentence.
So he goes, everyone says to me, you're such a good speaker. I can't do the Tate.
Okay.
Everyone
You
says
did,
to me,
yeah, that was fine.
everyone says to me, you're such a good speaker. Why is that? And then he says, well, why am I a better speaker than this guy? He's way older than me. We've been speaking for the same amount of time. He's actually been speaking for longer than I have. He has more practice speaking. So it's not about the practice, it's about the feedback. I'm constantly monitoring myself and saying, oh, I messed up there. I shouldn't have said that. I could have said it better this way. So I thought about that. And maybe I do need to listen back to more of these episodes just for the feedback that I get from listening to
I'll
myself,
I'll
as
say I think
uncomfortable
he
as it
is,
is.
forgive the interruption, but I think he is onto something because I noticed as I grew and matured as an instructor and a teacher, that I would mid class or even within 10, 15, 20, then 25 minutes, nearly at 5 minute intervals, I would do a sort of self assessment of what I had said and articulated, how I had presented material or an activity or project that was ongoing, and reflect upon not just how I conveyed it, but how it was received, and compare it to previous classes, both it perhaps in that day if I had taught the same section, or in previous years when I had engaged that material. You're able to multitask in that way and yet not detract from what you're trying to communicate. That is something that is more advanced. I would argue.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot.
Especially that's good in debating because remember, you're not just having to assess and evaluate what you're attempting to communicate, but you're also thinking and even you're not only assessing but anticipating what the opponent or the other side is going to attempt to argue.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of a chess match, which, by the way, of course, Andrew Tate's father was a chess master. You knew that, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, he was a chess champion as well. So it stands to reason he'd be good if that's the mode by which he thinks that he's become a good presenter and speaker.
Hmm. Do you want to talk at all about where you've been the last 2 weeks, or do you want to keep that to yourself?
Oh no, I could talk about that. Yeah, that's fine. The week, what was it? The 2 weeks ago, I was just here and available to do a podcast. However, Charlie was in Florida with Alex for the Praxis event, and it was just a more opportune, I think, convenient thing to do for you to interview him for the second time on the podcast, this time without me. And what I was very happy to see is that your genuine friendship and fraternal sentiment for each other and the blessing that you have felt in becoming close friends because of your experiences both in praxis and then with Alex moving toward the church and then eventually entering the church. I I don't I did It was much better. It was a much more opportune and fortuitous thing that I wasn't in the way of that. Not that I would be an encumbrance, but it allowed for more time for you guys to share and for him to share his fantastic story about God's really miraculous intervention in his life from and what I hope one day he'll also share is not just how his adult life has been formative toward his entrance into the church, but the circumstances by which he was moved, in a sense, pushed away in his early life from a deep understanding, love, appreciation of God and creation and even people, right?
Yeah.
So that would be he could perhaps be the first 3 time guest on the Hot Water History podcast. And then last week I was prepping for yet another round of trying to pass the Series 7 exam to get my licensure in finance. I pondered whether we should attempt to talk about Lysander Spooner and the whole question of licensure and when the state gets involved in license
Let's do it.
or
Let's do it.
we could touch upon it a little bit. I think Lysander Spooner, the great anarchist libertarian of the 19th century,
Entrepreneur.
entrepreneur. I suspect if we were able to sit Spooner down right here, he would say that his greatest attribute or accomplishment was as an entrepreneur. it just so happened that because he attended some socialist meetings that every anarcho-socialist wants to claim him for their own, I find within his writings very little sentiment that aligns with socialism, because the fatal but necessary and essential step is seizure of power by the state as an authority. And Spooner understood well before massive communist revolutions and the emergence of socialism and the takeover of regimes by socialist entities and powers. He understood how disastrous it would turn out to be, and how bunk Engels and Marx and the utopian socialists, like even Proudhon, who was probably the best among them, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who was, by the way, a foil and an opponent of Frederick Bastiat. They exchanged letters, and there's a famous series of debates that they had, which are fascinating to read. Some of them are, I've read them in the French actually, but I've also read part of them in English. I think they're all translated in English, but to hear these two brilliant men exchange things in the most eloquent French possible is really something. If you know a little bit of French and can get through that. Um, but one of his bugaboos, let's say, that is, say, Lysander Spooner, when you read his life, is the intrusion of the state into areas and arenas that, of course, from his mind, the state should not really exist as a coercive entity at all. However, it's really injurious and really harmful when it insinuates itself into arenas that lead to the malformation and the misdirection of what otherwise would be organic institutions. So, for example, you have the famous episodes of the little kid selling lemonade, and then you have the cops come and shut the lemonade stand down or write a citation for the family,
Yep.
as juveniles are attempting to engage in entrepreneurship. And then you have more serious, I suppose that's serious, but even more consequential or significant episodes wherein you have, and thankfully, a lot of great institutions like the Mises Institute and Illinois Policy Institute in particular, and its great president, Matt Paprocki, they've gone and tried to defend women who have created braid businesses with the long flowing braids that many Black women wear, uh, and then of course they're shut down by force because they don't have the proper barber's license, even though they're not engaged in what we would consider barber work. But anything having to do with hair, you have to receive a license for in Illinois in order to practice that business. And it's an arduous task, and it's just another level of red tape. So, my own personal experience with this is that in moving toward attaining licensure in finance, I mean, I failed this freaking Series 7 test 3 times now. And now I have to wait 6 months to take it again. And I could say with humility that I prepared massively for each exam. What's frustrating is that it's a multiple choice exam, so it's not what you would call highly analytical. However, there are parts which, and I suppose the attempt by FINRA is to make it as objective as possible, but in making it perhaps as objective as possible as they're attempting to do, and yet really trying to assess the how astute a person is, an applicant to enter in as a financial advisor and representative, a registered representative. I mean, 90 easily 99% of the material has nothing even tangentially to do with any work that I'd be doing in the future in being a financial advisor. And the stuff that is of interest and of real uh kind of significance, I really do know backwards and forwards. It's to the point where I was halfway through the exam, Charlie. I was like, "This is going great." You have to take it on a computer, and they wand you down to make sure you're not cheating or getting all these. it's very, very uh sterile. It's very
Hmm.
sterile, the whole process. So one day I got this. This is fine. And then it kind of got a little tense at the end as the clock's winding down. And so I'm still thinking, oh, I got this, and boom, the third time. So um I just suspect that there's a perverse incentive to what, and there's I suppose a series of perverse incentives, because every person with wherewithal and background in finance with whom I speak, they say they're first astonished that I haven't passed the test. But then secondly, they recognize, because many of them they took the previous Series 7 as it existed before.
Sure.
Um, and they're really amazed by the fact that as I converse with them and as I share and we work together or whatever it might be, we cooperate over a variety of different areas and conduits. They're like, well, how is it that you're not passing the exam? So the it's not addressing, I wish I could say, and with a measure of humility, that it was because I was ill prepared, or that I don't know the material, or that I make for a very bad financial advisor. I just I know that it's not the case, and I have attestation to the contrary. Oh, what are your thoughts as I'm sharing this?
Yeah, I mean, I
I'm
heard
just
this a
bitching
little
and
bit.
moaning.
I heard
Just
this a
buck
little
up
bit
and be like Saint
about.
Joseph. Get to the workbench and pass the exam.
No, actually, I think that there's got to be something up if you're failing a test 3 times. Like, how many times have you failed the test ever in your life?
Well, I mean, I failed tests that I don't care about. But
Like what?
or I was just winging it.
But like
Uh,
what?
but never for something that I had placed a lot of effort
Yeah,
into.
that's what's. It just doesn't smell right.
Well, and then furthermore, I mean, I have this. I've read the Kaplan textbook 2 times. I've taken copious notes.
You didn't get dumber. You didn't get
What's
dumber.
that?
You didn't get dumber.
No, and in fact, my results on each successive exam have gotten better and better and better. So, while that's good, it's incremental, and it's not getting there. And then, of course, in an arbitrary way, at the third, it's sort of three strikes you're out, as if that makes sense. And then you have to wait 6 months. So, what am I going to do in 6 months? I'm just going to read the thing again and then anticipate. The other thing is that the multiple choice questions are oftentimes the choices are so picayune and nuanced. You're like, well, none of these work, or all of these work to a degree. And yes, you're
Mm,
supposed to, as for example, as I was preparing students, as I had for more than a decade, for taking AP exams, you have to choose the most appropriate response. I understand that quite well. But when you're sitting there and you're trying to decide and act as a potential financial advisor, and the question you're imagining yourself in the role of a financial advisor for a client and addressing suitability or what type of option strategy might be suitable or might accommodate a particular demand of a customer, and you know that none of these answers are good, and all of them are quite bad on a scale of, say, on a scale of 10, 10 being ruinous to their financial health and 9 being catastrophic or something along those. All of them are nines and tens. So like, well, I don't know. What do you want me to recommend here? It's just sort of a flip of a coin. None of the above was not a choice. So I'll just keep cracking at it, and hopefully through further practice and understanding the mode of questioning, what they're trying to and how they're trying to direct you to the response, hopefully pick that up. So in the meantime, and you know what's quite astounding to me, I think I shared this with you at lunch on Sunday after Mass, is that there's absolutely no economics absolutely none. So whereas I thought in entering the field of finance and doing things like economic analysis, which I do, and marketing, and then eventually moving on to having a client base and book or something along those lines. Well, I thought, oh man, we're gonna get in really heady economic analysis, and even we could talk about economic history and address economic theory. I mean, I could bring up Mises, I could bring up Rothbard, I could bring up what a Larry Summers paper, or I could even refute Paul Krugman
Sure.
in a meeting. And not only is that not on the test and assessed, but it's really frowned upon in finance. Is really frowned upon because everyone ascribes to fiat, everyone ascribes to Keynesianism, and to introduce some contrary economic theory is really, really brands you as a weirdo, black sheep, impractical. And as I've heard from both friends and foes within the industry, oh, you're just an egghead, and we don't do that here. So quit wasting my time. So the friends do it charitably, but the foes not. So that's why long story short, I was just prepping for that exam, and I should have just been on the podcast given the result.
Yeah.
Although I have to recognize that I was four questions away out of 135 or 125 to getting it. So oh
It's too
well.
bad.
We'll get
Uh,
back in the batter's box in 6 months or so.
Anyways, I wanted to talk about a little bit of a throwback Tuesday. I kind of reached back on this one,
Awesome.
but you had a blog piece that you wrote the year I graduated high school, the summer after. It is called the anti-graduation speech. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is because, as you know, confirmation weekend is this weekend. And as I'm teaching this catechism class for all of these young men who are preparing to receive the great holy sacrament of confirmation, one of the things we're reminding them with is that this is not a graduation ceremony, that
Mm.
confirmation is, it doesn't end your life as a Catholic, which with a lot of people it does, especially the grade schools with the lukewarm religious education. That happens a lot where they get the confirmation and they're kind of done with mass. So it's not a religious sacrament. Being a Catholic is forever, and it's a race that we have to run with endurance. And this is a good point in your religious life, but your faith life keeps going.
Well,
And
and with confirmation, you're really opening yourself up to the great mystery of the power of the Holy Spirit as he enters in your life in mystical, practical, and transformative ways. To limit that to a type of stage of life or a phase of life that you're going to enter into or you're ending or commencing, whatever you're going to use is extremely limiting. And what Vatican II really did, and we don't have to go into why this was the case, but it robbed confirmation of the mysticism around it, the truly altering. It's a path altering, it's a direction altering sacrament, and that's the case whether it's received by uh, a convert at Easter as they're initiated in the church. It is a sacrament of initiation. So, or it's received by your lukewarm eighth grader who's just thrown into it because his family said to do it.
mhm,
It ought to be transformative.
yeah. And then I've been reflecting a lot about, I don't think you know this, but Thursday is the 4-year anniversary of my leave of absence submitted to Indiana. So I always celebrate May 9th as a special day.
That is a
So
special
it's
day.
also the Ascension, which is
Ah,
probably more important. But
yeah. Our Lord's ascension and your liberation.
yeah, so that's it. I've been reflecting a lot. And then you also have college graduation with this new business. We're always talking about college graduation. Anyways, I just remember that one article that you wrote back in 2019, and I want to share it with everyone because I think it's some of your best work.
It really is astounding that I went on to still be employed after
I,
that
I
one.
was you could look back at some of those blog articles and think that exact thought on a lot of these. Anyways,
Be bold, right? I might as well have been bold.
the anti-graduation speech, this is June 2019. That feels like so long ago. My goodness.
Eons.
It's not even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Since we are, due to our shared human nature of equal dignity in the eyes of God, each one of us loved into existence and life of exponentially greater worth than the most brilliant star, and for that matter, the entire inanimate universe itself. I refrain today from the expected and altogether banal greetings of the supposed dignitaries here. Okay, this is a very beautiful sentence because no high school valedictorian would ever to even mouth that all together. But
Yes.
in point of fact, the president and principal, board of trustees, and school administrators, along with most of the teachers, have had little to no positive influence or contribution to the success or personal achievements of the graduating class here assembled. In point of speculation, albeit grounded in the best recent research on the inferno that is modern schooling, you all most likely inhibited the intellectual growth, stunted the natural curiosity, and trivialized the spiritual life of these innocent men and women turned automations.
Automatons.
Oh, sorry, automatons. Your valedictorian displayed all of the characteristics of an intellectual sycophant slave when he thanked all of you and then bored us with absurd generalities about this class's collective past, present, and future. It reminds me of Oak Park.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about Stockholm syndrome. No mention of God, religion, metaphysics, the truly big and important stuff. I speak to you today since you have granted me the opportunity to do so, an invitation that the powers that be most surely wish they could instantaneously rescind. Parentheses, cue the mic cut off to address the big stuff. Guaranteed here a complete absence of cliches like, quote, be the future you want to see, or, quote, never, never give up. You can't be the future. It's in the future, number one. And two, determining when to give up is a central component to the prudent exercise of one's intellect. An example, you should all give up intersectional hypersensitivity about your identity, race, ethnicity, gender, preference of prairie school architecture to the brutalist school, bananas over apples, etc. It is all bullshit, mostly about constructs and entirely subjective, so no one really gives a shit. I digress there for a moment.
Sorry.
A worthy digression, but one nonetheless. Back to the big stuff and a particular topic that warrants your attention now that I've secured it, namely angels. You did hear me correctly. Angels. Sadly, we don't hear much about angels in the West today, which constitutes a sort of pan censorship, a real cultural blackout, which is ironically and utterly demonic. A healthy angelology puts us into our proper place. And I mean that in the most positive of ways. Angels are non corporal, non bodied, pure spirits, very much unlike the big boned Pace Carmen from
Pache.
South Pache Carmen from South Park, or pleasantly plump cherubs you see on toilet paper wrapping. They have prodigious power and sundry capacities. They are fearsome. They are brilliant beyond human measure. They are warriors for God. Knowing of the existence and then Contemplating the nature of these truly heavenly bodies places us in the proper ontological hierarchy of being. Note here, as hot as the eponymous Victoria's Secret models were about a decade ago, Victoria's Secret is no longer featuring those same models at present. As Grunkle Stan from the cartoon Gravity Falls sagaciously pointed out, bodies change. Bodies change. That's a great joke.
Thanks.
About the hierarchy, there is, of course, God at the top, the unmoved mover, the uncaused clause, pure act, omniscient and omnipotent, eternal and impassible outside of the incarnation. Patriarch St. Athanasius. As a historian, it is not hard to find examples of people and peoples assigning to themselves divine attributes. A popular one today is shapeshifting, i.e., gender shifting and then acting unaccordingly. Disaster soon and always follows. Look at the 20th century alone. From the Bolsheviks to the progressives and neocons in America, the elites are playing God, and the rest of us are expendable slaves to their ghastly missions. When not playing the divine, not just the elites, but the rest of the spiritually bankrupt play the angel and become the demon, or as Blaise Pascal brilliant put it, quote, man who plays the angel always ends up acting the beast. This was as true in Nazi Germany as it is today for Planned Parenthood and NARAL.
They're all
What's that?
National Abortion Rights
Yeah.
Alliance, something like that.
In order to advance the chosen Aryan race to make manifest in a better world, in order to preserve, more so fabricate a world without inconvenient encumbrances like children, well, Moloch needs to be fed and quote doctors, that was based in 2019, quote,
Yeah.
and doctors end up donning the costumes of the angel of death. They, not God or his righteous angels, wield the sword, the gun, and the scalpel. They mark the doorposts with human blood, but never their own, of course. Lucifer, it is said, likes nothing more than for men to admit not of his existence. I disagree. While he certainly revels in that, Satan rejoices and beams at making men demonic by having them espouse the quote lead rule opposite the golden, i.e., it's so heavy it brings you to hell. Hate God with all your heart and treat your neighbor as expendable.
Sorry, it was lead rule, so I was trying
Oh,
to compare the metals there.
lead and golden. Got it.
Hmm.
So, humans, my brothers and sisters, here and in purgatory, be human. Don't aspire to the angel or behave like the beast. Be the corporal, rational, powerful yet needy, loved yet wounded creatures and images of the divine master. Let's again be true saints at the rabbi above all other rabbis' feet, who so loved the world that he entered into it in our nature, not to make us angels, but to unite us with him. Listen attentively to all he said and says, namely, happiness is wholeness and holiness. My life is how you attain it all. One last thing. Jesus made no mistake in equating the operatives of the Roman state and the demons of the possessed man. They were legion. God made us free. The state is in other hands. No clause. To be free, extricate yourselves from its traps, its spells, its lures, its chains, equal public schooling, legal plunder, unending wars, sick ritual, and obligatory allegiance. In short, be a temporal anarchist and an eternal heavenly statist. Be free. I think none of you. In secula seculorum. Amen.
Hmm.
Wow. Pretty cool. Pretty cool reading that back.
Well, thank you for referencing it and reading it again
You've stayed
on the show
consistent.
because I'm sorry.
You've stayed consistent.
That's true. That's true.
What would change if you were writing it right now?
Not a word.
Okay. Yeah.
Not a word.
I mean, it'd
I
be
might throw
interesting
them
about the COVID. You probably throw in more COVID stuff. I mean,
to be sure. Although it's fascinating that there was an allusion to the non-authenticity and well, that we ought not respect the supposed credentials of doctors there.
yeah, definitely felt like there was some foreshadowing there too
Mm,
that you might not have realized at the time.
yeah. I was blessed to yeah, I was blessed to be able to write that. Of course, sitting in all of those graduations and hearing those, the redundancy of the speeches, the real vacuous nature of the speeches, I couldn't take it anymore. So I had to find an outlet. So it was cathartic for me. It was enjoyable to read through it again or have you read through it.
Let's get to the people's favorite segment now.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Meanwhile, in Oak Park, we got a couple stories. One, not much of a story, but our boy,
Oh, there he is. Robbie Paracott.
OP's Ravi Parakat shares success of Takeout 25 in new book. Quote, I think there are more issues that are solvable in the local context, he says.
Holy mother. I mean,
Based.
Robbie, being the entrepreneur, being the decentralist.
First, it was a movement to save Oak Park's restaurants during COVID-19. Then it was founding an organization dedicated to improving the wider restaurant community. Now, Oak Park trustee Ravi Parakat's next feat is publishing a book to spread the word about Takeout 25's local impact to the wider world. On April 30th, his self-published book, The Takeout 25 Effect, hit the stands, virtual and local. Subtitled Mobilizing Community for Positive Change, the book traces a narrative of how the movement began and succeeded.
This better be getting better after that quote, mobilizing community for positive change.
Parakat said he believes that giving readers a behind the scenes look will, quote, create a recipe for application of this idea that worked well in this community.
He's so punny. Look at that. Create a recipe. Good for him.
Quote, I felt like it could be applied in the context of other communities and to solve not just this problem, but other problems, he said. The concept of the original Takeout 25 was simple math at time. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very
Seriously,
poor sentence.
seriously, the Wednesday Journal is absolutely killing me with making me sound like I'm the idiot that can't read.
I want to
And it's
interject here and say
this is 3 straight weeks.
thanks for reading my work first and then reading this because it is instant validation.
It's gonna get a lot simpler for me. It's just gonna be like grunts. We're like 3 weeks away from just grunts and sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah, they
The
messed up the
concept.
sentence. They said was simple math. They meant to say either at a time. No, they did meant to say simple math at a time when restaurants and local businesses were closing around the state. If households in Oak Park spent $25 per week at local restaurants, that would push more than $1 million per month into the local food economy. The idea caught on. Through a Facebook page, residents and volunteers in the Takeout 25 community banded together to save local restaurants. Although it is impossible to know to which degree Takeout 25 was the reason, the fact is that few local eateries closed in Oak Park during COVID-19. The group soon spread the $25 challenge into neighboring communities as well.
Well, we could also say that a major factor was that Oak Parkers are relatively affluent and, right, as such, and given the number of restaurant options, they go out to eat a lot. So how would you be able to ever ascertain the effect of this? I'm not trying to rain on Robbie's parade, by the way.
Also, why couldn't they just, I don't know, not shut the restaurants down?
Well, a bit something that's a little bit intriguing to me is note that the nature is that this is very communal in the worst sense, and it's very egalitarian in a bad sense because he didn't go and say now the onus is on the wealthiest of Oak Parkers to go and not just frequent the French Laundry of Oak Park, whatever that might be, some shishi restaurants, but also hit Jimmy John's on Harlem. He doesn't make that appeal. He says everyone has to pitch in because $25 to someone living in a $4 million house in North Oak Park is a pity. It's nothing, right? It's a
Right.
tip for your valet.
Yeah.
Whereas someone, a single mom living in an apartment on Harrison to go $25 and then feel a, a civic obligation to do it, it's I find that almost distasteful. What
Let's just keep reading.
what's your take here?
I'll tell you.
All
I'm
right,
gonna
go
keep
ahead.
reading.
Mhm.
As the online community grew, the Takeout 25 team knew that there would be questions about who is behind it and skepticism about the goals. Quote, right from inception was building that trust and credibility with the community to say, yes, I'll be transparent about any funds that come here, Paracott said. I will spend it this way, and it's open books. And then when the nonprofit came on board, then it becomes transparent automatically. The success of that Facebook community inspired him and supporters to open a nonprofit organization. Its stated goal is to enable sustainable local food systems and supply chains through a community driven approach. One push is to help local restaurants compost their waste. Daily Bagel and the Happy Apple Pie Shop are early adopters. The reason for writing the book is Paracott's belief that good ideas can go farther with a map to follow.
If that's the case, I have a better idea. How about you cut the taxes for these businesses
Yeah.
or suspend the parking meter fines and the requirement, the obligation to pay parking meters, which serves as an inhibitor for people going out. In other words, create free market incentives rather than dreaming up this conceivably, although it's self-conceivably altruistic program of having a nonprofit and then patting yourself on the back when you have no ascertainable way to measure the return on the investment in the work. Sorry, I am raining on Robbie's parade here.
Quote, I think there are more issues that are solvable in the local context. What are the ingredients to make that work? How do you mobilize the community to support that? And how do you harness its power to really make it effective? Throughout the book, Paracott explains how anyone can start a movement with no capital investment using tools freely available to most people on the planet. Back in 2020, as the Facebook group grew, a team of volunteers worked to keep comments positive. It eventually became a rule for the group, and
That sounds sensorial.
it's something that Paracott said he believes is key to replicating the outcomes.
Get rid of all the negative feedback and reviews.
His hope for the book is that laying out the best practices that they discovered will help similar groups skip some of the growing pains that Oak Park's group experienced. Putting
Best
the
practices.
guardrails, putting the guardrails on is key, he said, quote, to say this is how you think about this problem, and this is how you solve for this problem within these rules and within these guidelines so that everybody feels included and everybody can come and participate and they're able to prove the fact that you be as successful as a collective. Takeout 25 later expanded to building community among local restaurant owners and managers. This facet of the organization worked to break down barriers to collaboration and communication. A Facebook group for restaurants only created community when there had only been competition before. One restaurant needed extra refrigerator space for a short time. Another was able to use excess paper plates. The group permitted them to find help. The growth in this restaurant-facing group helped Oak Park become the first green dining hub in Illinois. Along with the Illinois Green Business Association, Takeout 25 is working to build the state's first sustainable restaurant ecosystem.
What the hell does that mean? Oh my
Paracott said
God.
he also plans to work with larger organizations such as the Illinois Restaurant Association and the National Restaurant Association to get the word out about the group's efforts and the book. Endorsements for the book have ranged from local restaurateurs, nonprofit
Restaurateurs.
restaurateurs. They still spelled it wrong, right? Nonprofit
Yeah,
leaders,
they did.
and
They
even an
left out an
Olympic
N.
athlete. The book is available now at local retailers and on many online platforms. A book launch event will be held May 13th at 7 p.m. in the Oak Park Public Library in the Veterans Room. We should go. RSVPs are encouraged through the library's website or a link from takeout25.org. They said linked from. While Ravi Parakat used his personal funds to pay for the publication of the book, he has pledged a percent of any profit to be donated to the Takeout 25 organization. The book is a case study, he said, quote, so that it can go beyond our borders and boundaries. The goal is definitely to get the message out into the world.
Boy, he knows how to use the language of Oak Park, right? It's hard to tell whether that is authentic or if that's his means by which to work within the system, right?
I think it's authentic.
Ay. All right. My level of nausea is growing, unfortunately.
I think you're gonna get a little dizzier with this. Sister Teresita Wind, a quote, gem of a spiritual leader, dies at 81.
Teresita.
The former
Wait. Was she in the novitiate with Sister Shatanya?
The former pastoral associate at St. Catherine St. Lucy Church was the first Black woman to lead a religious order.
And her habit is nowhere to be found.
It gets better.
Oh God, here we go.
Remembered for her indelible impact on the congregation of St. Catherine St. Lucy Church during a 12-year tenure, not only for the quality of her preaching and singing, but also representing congregants who are not typically seen in the pulpit. Sister Teresita Wine died on April 28th. She was 81. Wine, the first African-American woman to lead a global religious order, according to Black Catholic Messenger, was the epitome of grace, even in the midst of great challenges, people who knew her said. Quote, she deeply moved people's hearts, minds, and souls with her gentle yet powerful spirit. She was gifted and a gem of a spiritual leader, said Jean Orlando, who attended Wine's lectures and workshops, although her home parish was Ascension Church. Born Helen Louise Wine in 1942, Sister Teresita. How do you get Teresita from Helen Louise?
Well, that's her religious name.
Oh, right. Sister Teresita grew up in a large family in Columbus, Ohio. Her father died when she was young, and her mother struggled to provide for her children, but insisted on sending them to a predominantly Italian Catholic school. She felt they would receive a better education there than at the segregated public school.
Whoa. Why? I mean, isn't that again a racial indictment? Why wouldn't they? What is it about the public school, the segregated public school, that made it so inferior to the Italian Catholic school? I suspect that they're not going to talk much about that.
No.
Maybe that's it.
Wind was one of the first African American students at the school. She often acted out, but curbed her behavior because of her interest in the school choir, which was led by a nun known to brook no nonsense. While she attended St. Joseph Academy in Ohio for her secondary education, she encountered the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur, who became such role models that she was determined to join their ranks. However, she was devastated to learn from the superior at Notre Dame that they had already filled their, quote, quota of Negro girls and were not accepting any more. It proved to be a temporary setback. Wine was accepted by the Sisters of Mary of the Presentation in Spring Valley, Illinois. After professing her vows in 1963, she was assigned to St. Andrew's School of Nursing in Buttonwood, North Dakota, where she completed her nursing training in 1966. She earned a bachelor's degree in nursing at Mary College in Bismarck.
In the St. Mary College, but okay.
In the tumultuous summer of 1968, rocked by the assassinations of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. and former U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, amid the backdrop of widespread protests against the Vietnam War, Wine joined 150 Black Catholic women in founding the National Black Sisters Conference in Pittsburgh. It was the beginning of a lifelong advocacy for Black women, religious and racial equality.
What a
Quote,
terrible sentence that is.
quote, it was important to see Teresita's presence as a powerful and influential Black Catholic at St. Kate's, an integrated church at the edge of Austin and Oak Park.
Oh my God, they call it St. Kate's. I'm so, ugh.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
It's a gorgeous church too, and I'm sure they've just destroyed it inside.
Wisdom emanated from her, and her faith was palpable. She was modest, but a living example of how meekness should never be mistaken for weakness, said Elliot Wimbush, retired pastor of First Congregational Church in Maywood. Feeling increasingly isolated in North Dakota, Wine jumped at the opportunity to join a team ministering in Chicago's Cabrini Green housing projects. While serving at St. Joseph Parish there, she earned a master's degree in religious studies at Mundelein College with a thesis titled Black Theology Begins in Preaching.
Oh God, you could tell they were handing those out at Zayers as well.
The Arch The Archdiocese of Chicago recognized the valuable work Wine was doing and appointed her director of liturgical formation for Black parishes. Her work also included overseeing adult religious education in the parishes in which she served. While in Chicago, Wine became reacquainted with the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur and realized she was still called to the order. A decade after they had denied her entrance, the order was ready to embrace her. She transferred her vows and life to the order in 1973.
Mm.
In 1979, Reverend John Carolyn invited Wine to join the recently merged St. Catherine St. Lucie Parish as a pastoral associate. He encouraged her to give the homily once a month,
Ugh.
in addition to visiting the sick, giving
Thus invalidating the mass. Thus invalidating the mass that these people attended. Great. Way to go, Reverend John Carolyn.
That's the part where I thought you would say something.
Give the homily. Okay. And
He,
totally demean the role of and the nature of holy orders. Well done.
he encouraged her to give the homily once a month, in addition to visiting the sick, giving retreats, singing in the church choir, and chairing the worship committee. She was a dynamic, invigorating catalyst for the church's racially diverse congregation. Wine's Good Friday services were memorable for Shelby Boblik, who served as president of SCSL St. Catherine St. Lucie's Pastoral Council during the latter part of Wine's tenure.
Can you pause? Notice how they're speaking of her as if she's the pastor. And then furthermore, I'm more acquainted with a type of Catholicism where we say that Good Friday services are the churches and not as if they're productions of a particular composer. This is the problem with modernist treatment of and deformation of the liturgy. It's a grand performance at which they're the directors and they have to insert their own personalities rather than having any type of liturgy, whether it's Tenebrae or anything during the Triduum or the Easter Vigil or anything that's done during Pentecost, you name it. It ought to be about Christ and communing with the transcendent is rather than it being a performative act of, in this case, someone who has not received holy orders and yet feels empowered, compelled, what have you, to lead and orchestrate a performance. I mean, it's just maniacal megalomania. That's all this modernistic progressive Catholicism is. I know in a way I sound like Alexander Dugin talking about what ails and has ailed the West since the Enlightenment, and that is individualism of that sort. So throw out the window the common good, throw out the window the notion of a church who, as St. Augustine has said centuries and centuries ago, dating back to the 5th century, that the Holy Spirit is the soul of the church. No. We have to have Sister Teresita be the soul of the church. And that should induce nausea into the heart and soul of any individual truly devout Catholic.
Quote, she prostrated herself at the foot of the altar to begin the
Ah,
service,
good
as is
God.
traditional for the presider.
She's
For,
not the presider. Go ahead.
for many in attendance, seeing a holy woman of St. Teresa's revered stature prostrate
Oh, you canonized her there too.
before the sacrifice of the cross was an embodiment and powerful witness that women are indeed public spiritual leaders, Boblik said.
Keep going.
Her leadership and preaching were ahead of their time amid the complexities of the role played by women religious in the Catholic Church.
I love how they say they couch it in it's always
It's so
complexities. There's
complex.
nothing complex about it.
It's really not that difficult to
It's
figure
when they
out.
say amid the complexities, it's just basic general confusion of the people who don't accept the church's teaching. It's not
Yes.
complex.
Yes. Exactly.
This is the same wordplay that they use with homophobia. It's not fear.
The Archdiocese of Chicago, however, didn't appreciate Wine's growing involvement and influence in the church.
Good Lord. Even the archdiocese, this woman must have been doing incantations. Did she ride in on a broom? Right?
When Reverend Edward Braxton, who many considered a stickler for propriety, took over as pastor in 1991, many of the ministries that Wine loved were taken away from her. She no longer was permitted to deliver the homily. She left the church soon after his arrival.
Okay, now get this. You know that Reverend Edward Braxton is now Bishop Braxton, right?
No,
Yeah.
of what?
He was he's an associate in the archdiocese.
Oh, within the arch.
Yeah.
In a 2014 Wednesday Journal article, Wine reflected on this difficult period. Quote, I still love this Catholic Church. I love it beyond the canonical restrictions that are placed on women. My faith keeps growing and deepening because my faith is my relationship with God, and Father Braxton did not take that away from me, she said. After leaving SCSL, Wind assumed increasingly substantial roles within the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur, including serving as provincial of the Ohio unit and between 2009 and 2022 as congregational leader based in Rome, a position that took her all over the world.
The the Ohio unit. Anyway, usually you talk about provinces of religious institutions, not units.
Yeah,
You speak more along that you use that term to describe a team of CIA operatives.
right. In early September 2014, Wind was welcomed back to SCSL as part of the church's 125th anniversary celebration. During the weekend, she led a well attended retreat and gave the homily, aptly about reconciliation during Mass.
Notice it's never her reconciliation, it's that the church has to reconcile itself to her dispositions,
Quote,
right?
during her homecoming, she preached humbly and eloquently about the long road to reconciliation. She encourages patience and perseverance because, as she puts it, reconciliation takes as long as it takes. But in the end, it's worth it because God's gift to us is a deeper peace, which she sang about beautifully, Wednesday Journal columnist Ken Trainer wrote in his book, Our Town, Oak Park. Ooh, I might have to get that book. Wine's last assignment was providing pastoral care at Mount Notre Dame Health Center in Reading, Ohio, a ministry that was halted by a recurrence of her cancer diagnosis in March 2023. Quote, we all benefited from Teresita's talents and warmth and generosity, said Pat Coco, who served as a staff member at SCSL during Wine's tenure and remained a good friend. Quote, she is already missed in my life, but remains in our prayers. A memorial mass is being planned for July 6th, Wine's birthday, at St. Catherine St. Lucie. Details will be available through the church.
And so now that she's gone, who has been given the responsibility for locking the doors and closing the lights on the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur. Because God knows, given that ridiculous onslaught that she led in disobeisance of the church, that there are no vocations going into that congregation order. Sorry, just dealing with facts here. I mean,
Yeah.
we the
Yeah,
these
because
congregations that
it's important
wholly
that
abandon their mission, uh, and it was something that I had to deal with when I was in formation too as a Dominican, with various, especially Dominican congregations. They're all dying out because they abandoned purposefully and intentionally not just the charism and the original founding mission of their congregation, especially if it had to do with teaching, and embraced all of these social justice causes that are always ruinous and just Marxist. But what what is there to motivate a young woman to enter and give her life to the said congregation when she's, as a 25-year-old, living in an apartment, has a car, and goes to work? And guess what the religious congregation with whom she might be communicating offers? Her own car, her own apartment, and her own job. Just a different one with a different title. And if she has to be a lesbian, happens to be a lesbian, she doesn't have to explain that to her parents. And she can be around a lot of other lesbians who want to complain and hate men together. What a wonderful attractant. I mean, they're obviously packing them in as a result of that.
yeah, I think
It's
that
like being on a softball team that always loses.
yeah, that's a good comparison. But I think that if someone was just hearing this for the first, I don't know, they might not be super familiar with us. They might think this sounds really harsh. And I think that probably the reason you and I are both kind of upset about this is because it also just it leads young men away from the priesthood as well.
Of course it does. This hyper feminization of the church, and then there's just endless and endless constant demands to feminize it more, feminize it more, feminize it more. And listen, when men encounter that, when fathers encounter that, when potential husbands encounter that, and see the absurdities and the virulently anti-Catholic and anti-Christian notions that are espoused by all of these women in an attempt to, again, transgender the church. Now, the church is, in a sense, has female characteristics, but it's because she's the bride of Christ. And in truly faithful, devout, and orthodox religious orders of women, especially those like the Poor Clares or the Benedictines, or when you have, for example, outside of Farmington Hills, you have the Dominican congregation and the sisters there who engage in and have for decades now perpetual adoration of the Eucharist in cloister. They're, as contemplatives, engaged in offering their prayers up for this church, and that is their sacrifice. And of course, congregations like the Dominicans in Nashville, St. Cecilia, and the Dominicans in Ave Maria, or the Ave Maria Dominicans in Ann Arbor, Michigan, they have to turn some novices or potential uh, aspirants away because there's so much of a demand. Because Christ doesn't call you to be the director of a faux liturgy that leads people away from the authentic faith. He calls you to a transformative life, a life transformed, a truly metanoic life, where you move from Saul to Paul, you move from Helen to Saint Therese. And in taking that on, you are a witness, a true martyr for Christ. And nothing's more manly and virtuous than that. You see? Nothing's
Yeah.
more manly and virtuous than that. What's not manly is where you say, my predilections, my biases, my concerns have to be not just at the forefront and center of things. They need to be celebrated, or else all of you are racist. All of you are just traditionalists, or and you're all just in the dark, as Francis would say. Enough of it. Enough of this. This is an abhorrent mutation. This is ape church, and it needs to be killed. It needs to be done. It needs to die an ignominious death, as its closest adherents are about to and are experiencing. So yes, this sounds harsh. I like how you put that. But Gary, people who are listening to us for the first time, they might say that this sounds harsh. I think you can admit that you listened to a Saint Teresita or Sister Teresita homily, one or two at least, right? Were
Good
you
one.
transformed?
Good one. It just really challenged my biases and
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, Father Mitch Pacwa and Bishop Strickland, you really gotta your homilies are okay, but you really gotta dig into the recordings of the Sister Teresita. Love Charlie
yeah.
Westerman.
Yeah. XO. Yeah, it was a little gay. I take it back.
Yeah, that was a lot, Gary, without the R.
All right.
That's it, huh?
Yeah, I guess on that note, we got to wrap it up.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
But another good episode. Some shout outs. Tridentine Brewing. Twisted History of the United States, the book. People forget. We wrote a great book, 1450 to 1945.
Yeah,
On
and
Amazon.
if you like the rendition of the blog entry about the anti-graduation speech, that was written 3 years before we completed the Twisted History of the United States. So it's even fresher takes.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You got anything else?
Nothing else. Although I did take to heart in the previous episode when you said, well, enough of saying we support or go out and support Trinity Brew, because that he doesn't need support. You need to partake in the merch, and you need to elevate your life by drinking such marvelous elixir as all the offerings from Trinity Brew.
Yeah, you're missing out by not following along.
Yeah, and follow Trinity Brew on Twitter. It's at Trinity Brew or Brewing. You'll find it. And Trevor's just an amazing follow. He's hysterically funny. He really takes down anyone who spouts out absurd heterodoxy. So he'll love various parts of this episode. So
Right.
God bless you, Trevor.
All right, that's all I got.
God bless. Peace.
Everyone have a good one. God bless.